Welcome. Today is Sunday, November 30th, 2014. My name is Derrick Broze, and you are listening or watching to The Conscious Resistance Live on the Conscious Resistance Network. Thank you guys for tuning in. Whether you're watching on our YouTube channel or listening on the SoundCloud, thank you for doing so. And please be sure to subscribe to those channels. Also follow us on Twitter at TheConsciousRN. And follow us on Facebook at the Conscious Resistance Network. And of course, you can find all of our content at theconsciousresistance.com. Before we get into this week's news, let's catch up a little bit about what's happening on our website, some of the latest content we've released. One of the things we've released this week is an interview from Jeff for Justice that he did this past May with Amber Lyon, who we also caught up with, myself and Tryptamine from the network. Talked with Amber Lyon, and Jeff talks with her for a few minutes here about healing from trauma. It's a great little piece. Check that out. There's also another interview done by Danilo, aka Peaceful Anarchism, Seda Essence, Reiki practitioner and energy healer from Texas. Interviews her. Check that one out. Also, we had a submission from Dominic about Ferguson and the problem with police. Katie Chaos talks to us about Ferguson and families, and more articles here from Danilo. GMOs are to food what Keynesian economic is to economics, and the first step to finding home. I don't know if I talked about that one last week. That's a brand new one from our friend in Argentina, Francis. Thank you for contributing, Francis. And I've got a couple other clips from last week's podcast on Mexico 43 and on the 45th anniversary of the occupation of Alcatraz, and plenty more on our YouTube channel. Go through there, find yourself some content. If you appreciate it, you like it, you want to invest in what we're doing, that's great. Either way, please share the articles, share the interviews. We each, from all around the United States and Philadelphia, Houston, internationally, California, all over the place, contributing this content for you guys, those who are interested in freedom, anarchy, spirituality, consciousness, etc. So please support our efforts by sharing the information and the work that we do, and thank you for doing that. This week we are getting back to the news, sort of developing this format every week, trying to figure out what works best for me, my schedule, and what is most appealing to you guys. And as I asked last week, please comment to me, let me know what works best for you. Now, what I do here on my show is a mix of presenting to you the latest news that I've written about this past week and my analysis of that, and then going deeper with a couple of stories that I think are more important and that we should discuss, and of course finding some philosophical importance in these stories and fleshing out these ideas for each of us to learn and grow. And then of course at the end of each show we feature a song, a music video from an independent conscious artist, so we can help expose new music for those who are looking for those outlets, because the awakening, the evolution, the revolution of mankind is not only taking place in our hearts and minds, but it's taking place in our actions. So this is activism, this is radio shows, articles, journalists, people who are choosing a higher path, and this is also happening in the arts and music. And there will not be a revolution and evolution without music, without the youth and the people. So we want to support them in those efforts. This week in our Newsblast, this is our sort of rapid fire news session, because there's so much that happens, and I write 30 to 40 stories a week of various length for the radio and for websites, and it's hard for me to pick and choose 3 or 4 stories, which is what I was doing before, just 3 or 4 stories that are important to me, because there's so much going on. So the Newsblast, we're going to get through a couple of these stories really quickly in just a couple of minutes, and then dive into the bigger stories. But please check out my work at derrickbroze.contently.com, and you can find links to all my articles, videos, news reports, and everything. And of course, my stuff is on theconsciousresistance.com. I also have another YouTube channel called youtube.com/DerrickBrozeLiveFree, and of course you can find a lot of my work, some of my older work, on the Houston Freethinkers YouTube channel and at thehoustonfreethinkers.com. So let's get into the news. This week, some scientists from 3 universities, let me pull this up for you guys, 3 different universities said that the practice of geoengineering or climate engineering may be necessary to save the planet from disastrous climate change, but will likely also be disastrous. Now, the reason I wanted to cover this story is because the topic of geoengineering, which is occasionally known as, okay, I got a kitten. This guy just, hello. All right, we good? Sorry, for those of you who are listening, not watching, I have a kitten coming up on, nuzzling on me and the microphone. All right, buddy, you need to move. Okay, so these scientists said that researchers from University of Leeds, Bristol, and Oxford have concluded the use of geoengineering may be necessary to halt climate change, but not without consequences. Professor Piers Forster of Leeds University told BBC that between 1.2 and 4.1 billion people could be adversely affected by changes in rainfall patterns due to geoengineering. The researchers use computer models to simulate possible effects of various geoengineering schemes, including spraying sulfate aerosols into the sky from planes, also known as solar radiation management, SRM. And the teams confirmed previous reports that show once a program begins, a geoengineering program, it must be maintained for years or there would be disastrous damage to the planet, including parts of the world turning into giant deserts and, as I said, rainfall patterns just affecting everyone. So the reason I talk about this as a science as a science and environmental topic is because I think it's one that isn't getting the mainstream media attention it should, and the reason for that is unfortunate is because it's tied into a conspiracy, that of the chemtrails. I don't even like using that word because I believe, like others, that geoengineering is chemtrails, and most likely this science, this industry is, like many others, being used in a way that it wasn't meant to. So I think there are likely corporations and government entities that are out there that are using geoengineering, which is the intentional mass-scale manipulation of the weather. And it is, weather manipulation exists. Do your research. Like I said, this is just a quick news bit. Do your research on weather manipulation. Do the research of geoengineering, cloud seeding. Look into China doing this, and you'll realize that this is something that does exist. This science does exist, despite it being only discussed as some kind of conspiracy theory. I believe, despite the agencies within the government and the universities saying that they're only minor research and they're using computer models, I think what they're speaking from is direct experience, that people are out there testing these on people without, they're out there testing this on the populations without discussing, without permission, and you know, it's going to have disastrous effects. So keep up with that, keep an open mind, and do your research on geoengineering. Of course, this week also, Ferguson, still in our minds and the conversation of the news, because earlier this week, Officer Darren Wilson was not indicted by the grand jury in Ferguson, Missouri. They released all the documents, and since then there have been accusations by various news agencies of corruption and of certain procedures being taken or not being taken in the Ferguson grand jury that typically would or would not happen. As soon as the announcement came, protests erupted in Ferguson through Monday night, through Tuesday, and pretty much throughout the week. I've since seen that they seem to have kind of slowed down a bit, I guess because of the Thanksgiving Day holiday, but there were also attempts to interrupt the Thanksgiving Day parade. So action continues, but there was action here in Houston. I actually put out a new video this week on the Houston Freethinkers YouTube channel of Houston protesters attempting to shut down some streets, and I was right there in the middle of it, getting pushed around by cops, if you want to check that out. But there was also large protests in Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago, and many other cities and places around the world that are standing up and do not agree with the decision, the grand jury's decision, and do not agree with police brutality. I'm not going to get into that too much because I know it's a contentious topic, but either way, I think we can agree that the police are making things worse every step of the way. The looters are not the same as the protesters, and the looters are isolated and not the whole of Ferguson. And what I'm thinking about Ferguson, I made a post earlier this week thinking about police brutality and violence in Brazil, thinking about Iguala, Mexico, down in Guerrero, where the 43 students are still missing and police corruption is rampant. Stop it. And thinking about protesters in Hong Kong, and really just thinking about the way that we all connect around the world, the many struggles that are taking place, and taking some time to do a meditation to reflect on these things and to realize that there are so many people, whether we are necessarily fighting the same fight they are or whether or not we have the same strategies that they are. I believe that at some level we are fighting the same fight, because it is us against oppression, is the predator class coming down on the people, and the people rising up and finding ways to assert their freedom. It may not always look the same in each city, each community, each country, but I believe the fight is the same. And this week, our brothers and sisters in Hong Kong faced removal from their now 2-month-long occupation, Occupy Central, which there are, as usual, various elements that are influencing this group, and I again would caution you to do your research about who's funding Occupy Central, who has helped, what Western interests may have influenced this. Look up the work of Brandon Turbeville and his writing on Occupy Central, Tony Cartolucci as well. But outside of those ideas, there are at the core of this people who are trying to fight for change, and they've been hitting the streets in the thousands. And in Hong Kong, in the Mong Kok district, they've been going for weeks and setting up tents. Well, this week, early Wednesday, the police came in and they swept up, dismantled tents, were erecting metal barricades back that the people had tied up and taken down, and apparently arrested some real key central student leaders who were important to this protest, Joshua Wong, Chi Feng, and Lester Shum. Again, maybe look into who those guys are, but important people that are important to the people on the ground, and they were arrested by the police and taken away. So just a reminder that this fight for freedom, this struggle that takes place around the world, is an international thing and is something that's important to so many people, and it's important for us to take time to reflect and acknowledge their existence and that we are in this together. Also, this week, following the Ferguson protests, now there's been talk of the Houston Police Department moving to adopt cameras for all of their officers within the next year. Chief of the Houston Police Department, Charles McClellan, said that he plans to put body cameras on all uniformed officers within a year. The cameras this year, they put 100 of them, 100 on officers for a pilot program, and after that the mayor said that she supports the program, but she would have trouble finding the funds to do this. The chief said that he believes he can put cameras on all 5,400 officers for about $7 million. So that's interesting. I know here in Houston I've been seeing a mixed reaction from this, from people who are like, oh great, more surveillance, and other people who are rightfully so doubting that this is going to be anything positive, and are saying like, well, they're just going to turn them off, or they're just whatever. But I do want to say that in one city, I need to look it up again because I can't remember what city exactly it is, but there was one city where they had a program where basically the police would record with their body cameras, and it would go to a third-party website, a third-party location, a server that anybody could go load up. You could go to the website, you could search the time of your incident and whatever happened and the officer's name, and then find all his data, and then look it up and find your incident. And so the cops couldn't delete it, you couldn't delete it. It would be in a third party's possession, and could save us from some of those silly situations. I think if it's done like that, then that's a positive thing, and it could lead to change. Let's see where it goes before we condemn it. At least there's some steps, or at least some lip service being paid towards reforming the police as we work to abolishing them. Last story in our Newsblast before we get into the deep stuff. United Nations human rights experts ask Obama not to allow redaction of torture report. Every time I write about a United Nations story, which I think is like, oh wow, a global official is condemning the American government for something they did bad, most people, or some of the more right-wing side of people, are anti-globalization, which I am against the UN, but they're like, oh, who cares what the United Nations says, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, this is somebody on a national level that, even though we may not believe in their authority, most people do think that they have authority and will listen to what they're saying, and that's something we need to use to our advantage. We don't have to respect them to use their words to fight our causes. God dang it. Got this cat crawling all over me, sorry. So on Wednesday, 7 United Nations human rights experts called on President Obama not to yield to pressure from the Central Intelligence Agency to redact portions of the Senate Intelligence Committee report on torture. The experts released an open letter to Obama stating that his decision will have, quote, far-reaching consequences for victims of human rights violations everywhere and for the credibility of the United States," end quote. The report is a result of a 4-year investigation into the CIA's use of torture techniques following 9/11. Oh my gosh, this is very difficult to do this with this kitten in the room. Alright, I'm going to pause that right there. This has been an ongoing battle, of course, for years now, and really the past couple months it's heated up as various officials and ex-government officials come out and say, like, we need to see this report, we need to know the full extent of what the CIA did, and not only the CIA. And you know, another thing on a note of this, why I write about these topics, I use the word torture, because in the mainstream they still say enhanced interrogation techniques, and I'm not interested in using euphemisms, especially in 2014, where most Americans should at least be aware or acknowledge that your government, your tax dollars, United States government, is torturing people with your funds, and it's a horrible thing. So we have to acknowledge that. Hopefully we'll find out more and we can put an end to that. Now let's move on to today's top stories. We lead the day with 2 stories of Indigenous resistance, which I'm always thankful and grateful to be able to bring to you guys. Keep my hands and my ears to the indigenous movements around the world, not just Native American, American Indian, but to those who are struggling in many ways. And the first story is from the Cree Nation in Canada, in Quebec. On last Sunday, members of the Cree Nation Youth Council began a Stand Against Uranium, that's a hashtag, Stand Against Uranium, solidarity march to raise awareness on the Cree Nation's opposition of uranium development on their land. Now, there's been a long fight since the 70s. You've heard me talk about John Trudell, and I've played some of his words on the shows before. John Trudell has been fighting, and raising awareness about uranium mining and how the way it affects indigenous communities for quite some time. This march went from Mistassini to Montreal, a distance of nearly 500 miles. The Solidarity March was expected to arrive in Montreal on December 15th, the final day of public hearings on the uranium industry in Quebec. And for more information on that story, please visit standagainsturanium.com. And of course, you can search the hashtag #StandAgainstUranium on Twitter and probably on Facebook even, and you'll find posts about that. I've got some good pictures and been following their progress. It's a great thing to see the youth of any nation, but specifically the youth of an indigenous nation still fighting this fight. On the note of John Trudell and Indigenous resistance, I heard back from John Trudell's people, and this coming week, the first week of December, I should be hearing back and getting some dates lined up to interview him this December. So yeah, I'm excited about that. Really stoked and honored to be able to speak with John and others who've been around for a while. So look out for that, guys. But also look into the history of the uranium mines and the resistance by the indigenous people. Now, not only is it a problem of them coming onto indigenous land and stealing their resources, that if they wanted to mine uranium, they would on their own land for whatever reason they chose to, but instead it's also about the crimes that are the crimes against their health and against the environment. This is one area that indigenous people seem to understand better than most Western modern nations, is that we have to live in harmony with the planet. And yesterday it really hit me when I was thinking about the idea that if any system, whether we call it capitalism, socialism, whatever economic, political system that we can conjure up, any system that is based around using finite resources is unsustainable and will ultimately always end up bad for the people and for the environment and for the animals and for the planet. I mean, we have to recognize that. So I don't care what you want to call your system, anarcho-capitalism, whatever it is, agorism, if you are creating and working towards an unsustainable solution, then that is a problem, and you're starting off on the wrong foot. And when you start off on the wrong foot, then you're headed down the wrong path, and when you're headed down the wrong path, then you need to rethink it and get back towards a path that will serve your purposes. This next story covers the Canadian More Canadian Indigenous Resistance. Canadian trappers block oil companies. This is just the past 2 weeks, I think, on the 19th, if I remember correctly. Trappers in Saskatchewan, Canada, recently established a roadblock to keep oil companies from operating on their land. The Din people of Dukarm are Aboriginal First Nations in northern Canada and have a long history of trapping for a living. They say this way of life is now being interrupted by security gates and operations from mineral and oil exploration. Bobby Montgrand said the province's let it burn forest fire policy also has decimated wildlife and destroyed cabins, making it increasingly difficult to make a living in a culturally sustainable way. He also said that if the companies are not stopped, quote, there will be nothing for our children to live on. And there's a pretty nice picture of them holding, I think it's one of their flags, and just standing guard on that street. I mean, this is the state of living now, is that people feel their way of life and their very existence under threat. They have to put their bodies and their lives on the line. I mean, this is, if that's the only thing that you have left, then that's what you're going to do, right? If you feel like somebody's coming into your community and they're going to take your resources, and without those resources you are going to die, or they're coming and they're threatening a way of life that your people have known for hundreds and hundreds of years, or even, let's say, 50 years, the Americans living here now, because as John Trudell and other natives point out, that we are now on the reservation. It's the same, you know, the old adage of saying that, like, oh, they came for the socialists and I didn't do anything. They came for the communists and I didn't do anything, etc., etc. Well, they came for the indigenous people. They came for the immigrants. They came for all these people, and now what they're going to do is turn their focus on the American people who resist these ways and who no longer want to take part in this. If you are resisting the programming, then you are a disruption to this machine. And this programming has to exist, this virus has to exist in order to infiltrate our minds and our way of thinking, so that we can allow this to happen. Because without that infiltration, that infection of statism, of blind worship of government and of all their official mouthpieces, without that, then we would not allow these things to happen. We would not allow these things to happen. So continue to resist that. Don't let them mine your minds for information and for your soul, for your essence. The next story has to deal with something that are known as reverse drug stings. And I wrote an article about this. Well, I wrote one just this week, but I wrote another one for Ben Swan a couple months ago. It was more extensive, and it was about a really good research study done by USA Today, actually, regarding the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and their use of something known as reverse drug stings. And so basically this is what we have now, and the FBI does this, other agencies do this. They all have their own form of entrapping quote-unquote terrorists and criminals. What the ATF does, though, is they go to poor communities, mainly black communities. This is statistically what's been shown through the USA Today study, that they're targeting poor black communities. They go there, they send an informant, and be like, yo, what's up, man? I got the stash house down the street. Nobody's there. I heard it's an easy place to rob. There's supposed to be all these guns. There's all these drugs. There's all this money. And start encouraging people who are poor already and maybe willing to do some dangerous things, illegal things, so they can get a meal and maybe try to come up and maybe even better their situation, or whatever the situation is. They're coming in there and they're bullshitting these people, and then they're getting them to go commit crimes and rob these stash houses. In many cases, the stash houses don't even exist. If there's even a house, when they go to the house, of course, there's no drugs, there's no guns, there's no money or anything. They just arrest them on the idea that they were willing to participate in these crimes. And now this week we had a federal judge say that the ATF is actually encouraging people to commit crimes. Judge William A. Fletcher with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said that the ATF's use of reverse drug stings is a waste of resources and encourages people to, quote, commit crimes they otherwise wouldn't commit. Judge Fletcher made the comments as part of an ongoing battle between federal prosecutors and lawyers for two men who are accused of drug conspiracy and robbery conspiracy charges. The charges were recently dropped after a district judge ruled the government engaged in outrageous misconduct. Reverse stings, of course, as I said, they involve the ATF fabricating a house filled with drugs or weapons and using undercover agents to encourage people to rob the non-existent houses. And what was interesting, and I really do want to do some more work on this, because this is one of those stories that when I wrote about it, people were like, well, does a bear shit in the woods? Because the title was, is the ATF targeting minorities for manufactured drug crimes? And no one was even surprised about it, and it didn't really hit very well. It didn't get the attention I think it needs and deserves. But I did receive some responses and some emails after that from people who said that their family members are in prison right now because of being involved in reverse drug stings, and there's a pretty big effort now to get some of these crimes overturned. And whether or not you support the use of drugs, and whether or not, say, any of these individuals have other records, what's important is if these people are going to prison, they're clogging up the prison system that's already filled with tons of individuals who are there for non-violent victimless crimes. I mean, if smoking marijuana is a victimless crime, I think that talking about robbing a house that doesn't exist and then never committing the crime, but planning or being willing to, is definitely a victimless crime. This is just the ATF and other federal agencies finding ways to arrest people. According to the USA Today report, 91% of people locked up under these stings were racial or ethnic minorities. The large majority were black or Hispanic. And yeah, I mean, this is just, it's ridiculous. These things go on, and this is the problem with the state and the bureaucracies. It's so big, it's so just monolithic and massive that many people don't want to believe that these things do happen, and it's difficult to see a situation like this and to be like, wow, what can I do as an individual? How can I make that better? There's people out there who are getting set up, and if you live in a big city, Philadelphia, Houston, places like this, I guarantee you this is happening in your city. I mean, in Houston, I know there's plenty of parts of town, 5th Ward and 3rd Ward, where there's abandoned houses, and I could easily see the cops trying to set something up like this and taking down some people who are doing really nothing other than trying to survive, and they're being encouraged to do that the wrong way by the quote-unquote authorities. Our next story involves the use of stingrays. I've been on this stingray blast for a couple weeks now. If you've been paying attention, I want you to know about the stingrays. Look into them, find out what they are about. I actually am going to be hosting an event in Houston on Thursday, December 11th at the Midtown Bar and Grill off West Gray. If you're in Houston, 7 p.m., the Houston Freethinkers with the American Civil Liberties Union Houston will be hosting Houston Under Watch, a teach-in on cell phone surveillance, and we'll be discussing not only the stingrays but all the other uses, all the other forms of surveillance technology that exist right now with the local police departments and the federal agencies, but with a focus on stingrays, cell site simulators, so we can educate the people about this, start getting information out. Really, if I don't want to use the force of government, how can I stop stingrays? Well, I need to find people who are smart and tech savvy and app savvy and are willing to make an app or some kind of tool that can disrupt and stop the stingrays from gathering our information. I plan to do that. Then I can also go to the streets and pass out information about these tools so that other friends and family and brothers and sisters that I have know about them and don't put themselves in unnecessary danger. We're going to do that. And then I can hold events in the community to tell more people. We're going to do that. And then some people are going to lobby city council and others to pass local laws on regulating what these things can do. I don't know if that sounds like a horrible idea, but I don't want to use the government to do it. There's also the issue of how these companies, Harris Corporation and others, make the police department sign non-disclosure agreements as part of their contract. That's an issue. So this is just something that needs more attention. This past week, the ACLU of California released a guide on surveillance for communities. It's called Making Smart Decisions About Surveillance, a guide for communities. It's designed to make it easier for communities to understand what type of surveillance technology is used in their neighborhoods. Although the guide focuses on California, it offers a variety of tips for grassroots activists across the country who are concerned about the proliferation of drones, automatic license plate readers, facial recognition, stingrays, and more in their community. There's a link to that with the PDF where you can download it and find out more and use that in your community. And of course, all these articles that we're going over here in the show are going to be in the description below this. So that's a helpful tool. We're about solutions, right? The ACLU just put out a guide for communities. If you live in a community and your community cares about being watched by police and you believe that you may be under watch, well then please go check that out. Another story related to stingrays, and I don't think I covered this last week because it's pretty recent. The ACLU and the larger ACLU has filed a Freedom of Information Act request regarding the exposed U.S. Marshal Service program that uses aircrafts to collect cell phone information. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that the Marshal Service was using Cessna planes equipped with cell site simulators, aka stingrays, at least 5 airports around the nation. The so-called DRT boxes, or dirt boxes as they call them in their documents, are supposed to be used for criminal investigations, but the ACLU says they can collect data from tens and thousands of people on a single flight. Pretty crazy. And I also wrote an article for Ben Swan this week called A Guide to Stingray Monitoring. Check that out. I may have written that last week, but either way, please check it out. It's really important. It goes into the history of the stingrays, a couple of the court cases, the fact that they're mobile, they're handheld, they're in cop cars, they can also be worn. The technology is developing rapidly, and we need to resist it at every turn. Resist it in your community. I was just looking at videos this morning of how myself and the Houston Freethinkers and other awesome community members came together in 2012 and kicked the TSA off the Houston Metro out of our city. And we did that without using the government. We did that because we came out and we voiced our opinion. We made sure that they knew that they were going to be losing lots of business. Use that strategy. Think about whose business will be hurt by the use of stingrays if the people turn against it and exploit that. This week in history. Yesterday was the 150th anniversary of the Sandy Creek Massacre. Sand Creek Massacre in Colorado. And last night I was at an event. My band played a show and we got to do a big opening prayer around the fire with everybody and do a moment of silence to the Sand Creek Massacre, where 150 years ago the American government committed genocide on nearly 200 Cheyenne and Arapaho people, most of them women and children. This was November 29th, 1864, by the Colorado Territory Militia. Nearly 200 people. Now, according to the Denver Post, beginning at dawn on yesterday, descendants of the survivors gathered on Monument Hill at the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site in southeastern Colorado for a private ceremony. After the private ceremony, there were public events, and they were commemorating the genocide and holding a candlelight vigil and a run in their honor. That's a good thing to see. Let me give you some more details on this. And actually, I saw yesterday a New York Times article marking the event, which was pretty powerful. Last week we had the 45th anniversary of the occupation of Alcatraz by the American Indian Movement in 1969, and this week we have the 150th anniversary of a massacre in 1864. And this is the History Channel's version of what happened. On this day in 1864, peaceful Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians are massacred by a band of Colonel John Chivington's Colorado Volunteers at Sand Creek, Colorado. The causes of the Sand Creek Massacre were rooted in a long conflict for control of the Great Plains of eastern Colorado. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 guaranteed ownership of the area north of the Arkansas River to the Nebraska border to the Cheyenne and the Arapaho. However, by the end of the decade, waves of Euro-American miners flooded across the region in search of gold in Colorado's Rocky Mountains, placing extreme pressure on the resources of the arid plains. By 1861, tensions between the new settlers and the Native Americans were rising. On February 8th of that year, a Cheyenne delegation headed by Chief Black Kettle, along with some Arapaho leaders, accepted a new settlement with the federal government. With the Indians ceded most of the land, but secured a 600 square mile reservation and annual payments. The delegation reasoned that continued hostilities would jeopardize their bargaining power. In the decentralized political world of the tribes, Black Kettle and his fellow delegates represented only part of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. Many did not accept this new agreement, called the Treaty of Fort Wise. The new reservation and federal payments proved unable to sustain the tribes. During the Civil War, tensions again rose, and sporadic violence broke out between the Anglos and the Indians. In June 1864, John Evans, governor of the territory of Colorado, attempted to isolate recalcitrant Indians by inviting, quote, friendly Indians to camp near military forts and receive provisions and protections. He also called for volunteers to fill the military void left when most of the regular troops in Colorado were sent to other areas during the Civil War. In August 1864, Evans met with Chief Black Kettle and several other chiefs to forge a new peace, and all parties were left satisfied. Black Kettle moved his band to Fort Lyon, Colorado, where the commanding officer encouraged him to hunt near Sand Creek. In what can only be considered an act of treachery, Chivington moved his troops to the plains, and on November 29th, they attacked the unsuspecting Indians, scattering men, women, and children, and hunting them down. The casualties reflected the one-sided nature of the fight. 9 of Chivington's men were killed, 148 of Black Kettle's followers were slaughtered, more than half of them were women and children. The Colorado volunteers returned and killed the wounded, mutilated the bodies, and set fire to the village. The atrocities committed by the soldiers were initially praised, but then condemned as the circumstances of the massacre emerged. Chivington resigned from the military and aborted his budding political career. Black Kettle survived and continued his peace efforts. In 1865, he accepted a new reservation in Indian Territory. So today, whenever you're hearing this, I'm recording this Sunday morning. This is the day after the 150th anniversary of the Sand Creek Massacre. Whenever you're hearing this, whenever you're listening to this, take a moment of silence. Remember those people who were slaughtered, not only in this incident, but definitely in this incident, and in plenty of others around the United States and around the world, as people have been oppressed. And as I said earlier, remembering that the American population has become the new Native American, the new indigenous population, the new population that will be extinct soon if it does not learn to resist and to fight back against the oppression that is happening. And as the American Indians found out 500 years ago and found out 40 years ago in the modern resistance, fighting them physically does not seem to work. But by promoting and creating a change that is deeper, that is within our hearts and minds, I believe that we are going to find a way to resist this. John Trudell and many of others have found over a period of time, after resisting and fighting these people directly, that you can't win that way. We've tried to fight them militarily. They have the numbers, they have the guns, but they have the money. But we have to recognize that that is not true power, and that we have power, and so we can fight them. They massacred our ancestors, whether you're native or not. This system, I'm not saying they as in the white people, the Europeans, but there's a force, a dark force that exists. It's deep within the spirit, and for whatever reason, some people seem to be infected or driven by it and encouraged by this dark side of the light. And they are the opposite, the dualistic version of us, the reflection. Without them doing what they are doing, we would not see our goal, our purpose, and our fight for good and for justice. But we can overcome them by living righteously, by living consciously, and creating within our hearts and our minds the world that we want to see, and being consistent in our words, our thoughts, our words, and our actions, and promoting positivity, peace, freedom, self-responsibility, self-reliance, individuality, community, compassion. All these things, we can and will create a better world. The last story I got for you today has to do with a recent study. This is a positive one to end a note on now. 2 new studies this year highlighting the impact expressions of gratitude have on building better relationships. First of all, a quote from Cicero: "Gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others." 2 new studies highlight the impact expressions of gratitude and giving thanks can have on health and happiness. A study published in the journal Emotion found that saying thank you to new acquaintances creates an increased likelihood of prolonged friendship. Researchers say a simple thank you could lead to new opportunities. Another study published in the Journal of Applied Sports Psychology found an increase in self-esteem for athletes who express gratitude. The study supports the idea that grateful people are happier and have a higher self-esteem because they appreciate other people's success. I think so too. If you're able to say thank you and to appreciate someone else's ability to succeed and you have no ill will towards them, then you're likely a happier person, and you have no reason to judge, to hate, to be jealous, because you're happy within your own self. And that's where I'm going to leave it today. Thank you guys for tuning in, whether you're watching or listening. Please, once again, subscribe to the SoundCloud so you can get all these. Download them if you want. Share them with your friends. Do whatever you want with them. Listen to the YouTube, watch the YouTubes. I put the clips out, shorter clips of the news stories if you want to check them out like that. Also, all the information for the links, the articles I covered will be in the description below. And yeah, please stay tuned to our website throughout the week and our Facebook. We've got lots of new content coming. Also, join us on tsu.co. It's a new social network that we think is a lot better. You can find the Conscious Resistance on there. Go to tsu.co/conscious resistance and join through our page. Become a part of that growing community as we move away from Facebook and really social media in general towards a tighter knit, real connection with each other. But that's for another show. Thank you guys for listening or watching. I appreciate who you are. Thank you for appreciating who I am. Let's work towards creating a better world together, one day at a time, one moment at a time, one now at a time. As always, if you can hear this, you are the resistance. Peace.
I started to drift into the unknown and despair. I had fading faith and happiness just wasn't there. And then I looked up and I saw this ray of light. It was bright. Light, love, hope, peace, joy, joy, joy. In the light of happiness, so blessed, so free, universally. Having fun in the sun, living good, living great. But it wasn't always that way.
At times we all fear what we don't understand. Failing to realize it's all part of a plan. Blinded by despair till we're mentally morbid. Running round in circles like the planets in orbit. Can a curse truly be a blessing in your perspective? Sometimes we gotta struggle in order to learn the lessons. If you wanna build, then be ready to destroy the shackles of your mind and the ego you employ.
My days were once covered in grey, empty and washed away. It was so hard to rise. Refused to open up my eyes. Couldn't be bothered to try. Giving up, giving in, lots of hope within until I saw the light. Love, hope, peace, joy, joy, joy. In the light of happiness, so blessed, so free, universally. Having fun in the sun, living good, living great. But it wasn't always that way.
I asked who could defend me from a world so unfriendly. Guided by the truth to an energy within me. Same energy reflects in beauty I see. From the moon to the stars to the roots of a tree. From the sun in the sky to the breath inside me. We're vividly connected to a deeper reality. So when we understand how related are we can truly submit to our Creator's decree.
No one could really save me. It was down to me, setting me free. I had